So, I'm a pretty big fan of Nintendo games. I think I've documented enough videos to say that confidently at this point. But another pretty underexplored part of my interests lies in the fighting game community. I'm a really big fan of fighting games, and while I don't get a ton of opportunities to show them off, especially on this channel, it is worth noting that I do have a very special place in my heart for them. Which is why the Super Smash Bros. Series is, of course, one of my favorite games, well, ever. Aside from the massive crossover aspect, which appeals to me in particular, I also just love the mechanics because they're really simple and easy to learn, and there's really a character for everybody, especially with such a massive roster. But that leads to an inevitable question. What if you are the one in the ring? Well, today I'm aiming to answer that question exactly with how you would beat every Smash Bros. Character in a fight. I realize you probably can't see or read anything, I'm sorry. Anyways, let's cover some of the parameters first and foremost. So what are we counting as a win and a battle? Now, obviously, a battle could be as straightforward as an actual fight, but I'm also expanding the definition to include things like checkers, chess, any type of game or competition really, as well as just surviving the day. Simply put, a lot of these guys are incredibly powerful, and there's a good chance that they would more than likely put anybody 6 feet under. So rather than trying to figure out what the perfect strategy for winning a combat scenario with them every time is, we're instead going to be looking at it that if I walk away happier than they are at the end of it, that's still technically going to be a win. I also think it's worth noting that honor is for fools, and my goal is to survive here, but also to make sure that their day is just a little bit worse than it started. So let's begin. I've grouped the fighters into several categories, but it's important to note that a lot of them could technically overlap with each other, so just know that the category I'm putting them in here is mostly to be the best representative of what I think would be the way to beat them, rather than the only way to beat them. Starting off with the friendship scheme. This category is basically one where rather than trying to fight your opponent, you would instead potentially be turning them into a long-term friend or an ally, which is perfectly exemplified with Yoshi here. The Yoshi species is incredibly trusting and nurturing, as shown by taking baby Mario and baby Luigi and raising them up so that they can become the Paisano brothers that we know today. Similarly, Kirby, who is not on this graphic because I forgot about him, is incredibly trusting and naive to a point where he has actively paired himself with genocidal overlords multiple times. And I'd like to think I'm at least a little bit more of a decent human being than that, but that's still subject to question. I've also included all of the Pokemon here. The Pokemon franchise as a whole is about making friends with your new partners and allies and having battles with each other, but you could also just have a bunch of Pokemon as pets. And as far as I'm concerned, giving Pikachu some ketchup for a lifelong pal is a totally worthwhile trade. I've also included Ness, Lucas, and Villager here for two important reasons. First and foremost, I don't want to advocate for beating up children because that's really messed up yeah. But beyond that, I do actually think there is a reason to make them friends here. Villager could very easily be pacified by simply giving him a new bug, seeing as Animal Crossing barely adds any each year. Ness and Lucas are both roughly children, so if you could work yourself into a babysitting position and basically help these two to just grow and develop, well, I mean, aside from that being incredibly rewarding, I also imagine it would be great in case you ever happen to end up in a blood sport with the both of them, because you could more than likely talk them down. And especially Lucas could definitely use some positive influences in his life. I've also included Isabelle and Duck Hunt here. Both of these are dogs, so I imagine that similar to the Pokemon, you could probably just feed them some treats and give them some cuddles and it would probably be a good end of fight. But there are two characters here who might seem a little bit odd, that being Cloud and the Aegis twins. I'm not gonna spoil Xenoblade 2, but all I can say is these two need friendship, they do not need another battle on their hands. As for Cloud, on paper this one might seem like a bad placement here, but in actuality, and again, spoilers here, Cloud has lost all of his memories, so if you can gaslight him into believing the two of you were friends, at a certain point the lie is just gonna become true. And it would be very helpful to have a lot of these guys on your side. Finally, we have Pit and Sora here. Both of them are very nice and friendly people who generally only fight forces of evil. And as long as you're willing to work with them, they're more than likely going to be happy to be friends with you. Moving on, let's train. These are most of the fighting game characters and also Meta Knight. Now, the main reasoning here is that you're probably not going to beat people who are trained martial artists, and even if you are a trained martial artist, like I am, you're still probably not going to be boxing with people who can throw fireballs and destroy entire buildings. And let's not even touch on Meta Knight there, because, yeah, it doesn't end well. But the thing is, these are all pretty chill guys, and all of them have at some point been willing to help improve and foster the skills of other people. Ken canonically has a student in the form of Sean, or at least before Street Fighter VI. Ryu regularly helps Sakura improve her skills and has a friendly rivalry with Ken, implying he's a pretty chill guy to grow stronger with. Harry raises Rock Howard, who is the child of Geese Howard, and improves his fighting abilities. And Meta Knight literally started a whole crusade against Dreamland because they were too lazy. You mean to tell me that this guy wouldn't be totally happy to help somebody improve their skills if they were asked? So all of these guys would be great for teaching you, eventually getting stronger, and potentially netting a win down the line. It is a more long-term strategy, but let's be real. I would love to learn how to throw fireballs out of my hands, and I think you would too. Now, here we're getting on to a bit more of a iffy solutions, because this is not my problem, it's somebody else's. Starting with Sheik and Zelda, these two are fighters who, on paper, would probably seem fairly difficult to defeat. After all, they don't really have any major exploitable weaknesses, and they're incredibly smart, so they're unlikely to be tricked. But the main thing is if you call in Link, because as we all know, Link will 100% insert himself into any problem he possibly can for the sake of Sheik and Zelda as her knight. This does mean that we would need to defeat Link, but don't worry, I've got a plan for that. There's also Ridley, who I've cropped horribly here. Yeah, no, you're not winning this fight. Call Samus. How are we getting Samus on our side? We'll get to it. Next up at the bottom here, we have the Ice Climbers. These are two children wielding hammers who are climbing a mountain. Call their parents. They are definitely worried about them. And finally, we have the king himself, or at least one of the kings, you get the idea. K. Rool presented a unique challenge for me at first because he was intelligent. He was unlike most of the other characters in his series. He had a wide variety of different pieces of equipment, and he's an insane giant crocodile. But that's when I had the realization. Who handles crocodiles best in the world? Well, unfortunately, they died a while ago, but the entire state of Florida has plenty of experience dealing with these guys, and more importantly, they're full of people who are going to be even more insane than I am. So, calling somebody up from Florida and getting them to take care of the crocodile, even if it's probably going to be a little bit insulting to you by the end of it, is 100% a viable strategy. But while there are definitely a lot of characters that we can't outwit, in this battle, wits are everything. Let's start over here with Pokemon Trainer, or as I'm gonna call him, Red, because that's his name and I don't know why nobody refers to him as that. Now, again, I'm not gonna advocate beating up children. That's not okay. I feel like I've covered that enough times for everybody to know my stance on it. But there is a specific thing with Red that would make it very easy to have him not fight you. And that is staring straight forward and looking in a single direction. Anybody who has ever played a Pokemon game, especially in Generation 3 and before, knows just how annoying it is to have to face a million trainers. And oh my gosh, if you can avoid it, you're going to be doing it every single time. Even assuming you couldn't though, and that Red does come up and challenge you, remember how earlier I said we would be collecting a whole bunch of Pokemon? Well, now you can have a Pokemon battle. And again, much like Ryu and Ken, even if over time, you're probably going to take a win here or there. Now, Captain Falcon might seem a bit surprising, but he is a stunt person and daredevil at heart. Convince him to do something really stupid and really dangerous, and you're either going to see him crash and burn in a blaze of glory, or you can just keep upping the ante and see what eventually happens. Banjo and Kazooie are a fucking bear and bird combo that I forgot to find anything for. What was their solution again? Yes, okay. Yeah, I remember now. When I check the script that has all of the details in it. Banjo and Kazooie are a bear and a bird. You're not beating a bear and a bird in a, well, maybe you're beating a bird, but you're not beating a bear in a fight. But they're also musicians at heart, which means if you can rock some skills on your guitar that I definitely don't know how to play, you could potentially beat them in a battle of the bands. And As we all know, that's the most high-stakes thing that could possibly happen in the year 2000. Time Machine notwithstanding, this is a great strategy. The Belmonts. These are two people who have no right being as powerful as they actually are. Castlevania gets pretty nutty. But here's the thing. Much like Pit and Sora, they're like uber religious and only really fight the forces of evil. Well, I guess Sora's not really religious. The point is, they fight bad people. And if you are willing to talk shop about religion, I'm willing to bet you could probably convince them you're not evil and de-escalate the situation. Speaking of holy, let's look at Dark Pit here. You're probably a bit surprised to see him here. But the thing is, Dark Pit is not the emo edgelord people say he is. He is kind of like that, but if you've played Kid Icarus Uprising, you know his whole thing is essentially about proving how he's stronger and better than Pit in every way. And that means he doesn't really like fighting people who are weaker than him. You are definitely going to be weaker than him. Tell him that and he's likely to leave you alone if be a little bit insulting. And you could argue you're leaving the fight a little bit more disappointed than he is at that point, but you're also leaving it alive and he doesn't have anybody to spar with. So I'm still calling that a win. Sans Undertale. Yes, I know this is just a Mii costume, but it's a Mii costume that is removed enough that I figured I would talk about it. Don't expect any others to show up though. In Undertale itself, it is specifically noted that Sans does not fight you because he has made a promise to Toriel, one of the characters in that game, to not hurt humanity unless he has to, which leaves it possible for you to become friends with him. And if you have a terrible enough sense of humor, which I genuinely do, I'm willing to bet you could get along with this guy pretty well. There's also the fact that depending on when in the order you fight this guy, he straight up can't even damage you. Remember, in Sans' fight in the Genocide route of Undertale, all of the damage you are taking is damage done over time thanks to karma, and while that's a little bit ill-defined, depending on the amount of murders you've committed, that would mean Sans' attacks potentially couldn't even hurt you, further reinforced by the 10th anniversary fight. And I'm assuming most of you haven't killed a lot of people. Finally, we have the Mario princesses, each of which has their own strategy. Rosalina's is the scummiest, so I'm gonna get it out of the way. Exploit insecurities about her weight. This one is really shitty and I don't like it, but it's what I came up with. In Mario Kart Wii, she's officially classed as a heavyweight, and I don't like it, but picking at that insecurity is probably gonna be your best bet. Daisy, on the other hand, is much more straightforward. She's competitive. Much like Dark Pit, you could very easily convince her, hey, you'd kick my ass in a straight fight, so let's do something else, and she'd more than likely take the option. And finally, when it comes to Peach, if you've ever played the Mario RPG, you would know that Peach actually has a special item kept away in her room, something that she is too embarrassed to let Mario or the player or the rest of her kingdom see. So if you can get a little bit of incriminating blackmail, you've got yourself a free peace treaty, albeit one with a bit of tension in the air. So let's explain this one. Again, probably not winning a straight fight against these guys. Literal goddess, god killer, blows up planets on the regular. Granted, usually via chain reactions with bombs, but you get the idea. These are not the kind of people who you're gonna be beating in a game, but you might beat them if you have game, because I'm just recommending you flirt with all three of these people. Palutena is maybe, I mean, being real, most of them are gonna turn you down, but Palutena is a genuinely nice person and will at least hear you out. Bayonetta probably laugh at your face, but is likely to de-escalate from violence. And Samus canonically has a weakness for small critters. Good thing you just got an entire collection of Pokemon to show off. You could very easily de-escalate the situation with all three of them. You might be asking yourself, why are there no male characters in this category? And the answer to that is, yeah. But I'm sure that there are male characters who this kind of strategy would also potentially work with. Ah, yes. Mario characters. Mario characters are an interesting collective because there is one strategy that is surprisingly effective at way too many of them that would net you victories. The first and foremost is the Mario Bros themselves. All of their powers, well, most of their powers anyways, come from power-ups, which can be used by just about anybody. This means that if you can steal their power-ups and use them against them, you're fighting them on much more even footing, giving you a lot of additional options for taking them down. As for Donkey Kong and Wario, these two are less easily stealable in terms of their power-ups, mostly because they don't really use that many, but they are also both incredibly stupid and motivated by specific goals. In Donkey Kong's case, it's bananas, and in Wario's case, it's gold and jewels. Grab a few of these, lure them to the mouth of an active volcano, toss them in, and hope for the best. Alternatively, for Wario, you can just wait for him to do a waft and throw a match his way and watch the fireworks. Either works. Now we're getting into the categories of people who I think it's actually feasible to say you could beat in a direct fight. The Mii, Gunner, Brawler, and Sword Fighter are all just ordinary people who have weapons. This does make them inherently very dangerous, but they're also still ordinary people, and you could put them down just as easily as you could a normal person with the right equipment. The same goes for Snake, but, good luck. Snake is a trained secret agent who has been doing combat with soldiers that have far more experience than the average person is going to have, and he also carries an entire arsenal of explosives. Technically speaking, he's one of the hardest characters on the roster to defeat simply because he doesn't have an exploitable weakness, and yet he's also one of the easiest to put down, which is quite a fascinating dichotomy to me. And then, despite having the appearance of a giant dragon for a fist, is actually not that much stronger than the average person arms aside, so again, pow. Same with Steve, comes from Minecraft, which does have bows and arrows for long-range combat, but pow. Wii Fit Trainer, just a lady who does yoga, same category. Dr. Mario, it's not actually Mario, they are confirmed to be different characters. Bang. Little Mac, Boxer, bang. Shulk is probably interesting here because he's the most powerful character on the roster who I think, well, aside from possibly Joker anyways, that you could just take in a straight up fight. And the reason for that is that Shulk's primary and only weapon, the Monado, cannot hurt humans. I am human, and I'm willing to assume most of the people watching this are too. So I think it's a pretty fair case to say that most everybody who watches this could defeat Shulk fairly easily, simply by virtue of the fact that despite having an awesome laser sword and the ability to see into the future, he literally cannot hurt you in any way. Finally, we have these little guys, and I do truly mean little. Rob is canonically a 15-inch tall plastic toy, which you could snap fairly easily, and I'm sure many a child has at some point, and Alf and Olimar are less than an inch tall. I think you can see what the obvious solution is. I do think it is important, though, to note the only character in the roster that I thought was important enough to get their entire separate section, because Joker is complicated. So, within the world of Persona 5, Joker's powers come from a place called the Metaverse, an alternate reality where shadows exist and can freely influence human emotions and mental states. That's how Joker does his thing, because in the real world, he is Ren Amamiya, just an ordinary Japanese high school student. Granted, he is more athletic than normal and seemingly has pretty decent reaction time and martial arts training, but he's still a teenager, pow. Granted, the Persona series is a little inconsistent on how effective guns are in the first place, but in the real world, he does not have any weapons and is only relying on his high schooler level strength and martial arts training. As Joker, though, things get a lot more complicated. Being a wild card, Joker has access to hundreds of different personas, all with their own resistances, abilities, and whatnot. Assuming that you're facing a full-power Joker who has access to every persona he's ever gotten, that means you're literally fighting biblical Lucifer and the angel of God's wrath in the form of Sataniel. I'm just gonna say outright, no. No. But if we're just sticking with Arsene, then our options open up significantly. Arsene canonically has a weakness to both ice and holy magics, which means that if you're able to raid a church and get some holy water and communion wine, you've got a potential win con. Assuming you don't want to commit blasphemy and robbing a bank, however, literally just grab some ice cubes from your freezer and continue to pelt him until he goes down. I'm not even kidding to you, in Persona 5 there is an item that does ice damage that is officially just an ice cube. So pelt him with the thing in your freezer until he goes down, and even better, Joker will be stunned by this, making it one of the easiest victories in the entire run, despite, again, this being one of the most powerful characters. Oh, yeah, so speaking of powerful characters, good luck is an accurate description for this category because your options are insanely limited. Starting with Kazuya Mishima, the weakest of these characters. In the ending of Tekken 8, we literally see his son Jin, who uses the Devil Gene and is less proficient at using said Devil Gene than Kazuya, scorch the planet's surface. That's way more powerful than any individual human is going to be capable of matching, but he does have one specific weakness, and that is shoes. At the ending of Tekken 8 with Kazuya's character story, you actually see him open up to his entire collection of J's, and it's great. If you're wanting to win, getting him a pair of fancy shoes is genuinely a good way of getting him off your back. Sephiroth, on the other hand, is a genocidal mama's boy who wants to destroy the entire planet for reasons. But he's also, crucially, an anime character who relies on the drip. And in Final Fantasy lore, it is explicitly stated that when he goes to shower, he uses an entire bottle of shampoo and conditioner to wash his hair. Simply remove the bottles from his personal stash, and he will refuse to fight you on principle because we know anime characters must be dripped out of their mind before they engage in a battle. As for Mewtwo, yeah, I'll be honest, general Pokemon strats don't work here, but Mewtwo is actually kind of reasonable. It varies, of course, depending on where you're looking at, and certain items can send him off the deep end, but in the first Pokemon movie, Mewtwo learns an important and salient lesson that humanity is not complete garbage. People will argue about that one, but the important thing to note is that Mewtwo is a philosophical being who would be willing to see the better things in life. You could sit down and talk to him. And beyond that, Mewtwo is mostly an isolationist who doesn't really like engaging with people all that much. So you could probably convince it to leave you alone if you agreed to have your mind erased of even meeting it in the first place. Now we're moving on to the characters who have specific, targetable, and exploitable weaknesses that would be easy to defeat. Let's start with Mr. Game & Watch. Game & Watch is literally a two-dimensional figure. I can move in 3 dimensions. I walk to the side and he is completely toast. Piranha Plant is a plant. Get some weed killer. It's that simple. Bowser and Bowser Jr. are both incredibly powerful, but again, they got one little thing. Bowser is canonically an idiot. He has fallen for his own traps so many times, and as long as you can get past him to activate them, which, considering you have Mario power-ups at your disposal, yeah, I'd say you definitely could. Bowser Jr., on the other hand, is a little smarter than his dad, generally speaking, but his main attacks all typically rely on paint. Bring some paint thinner, you've got an anti-Bowser Jr. weapon. Now, you're probably a bit surprised that Ganondorf is here and not in the oh my god you're going to die tier with the other 3 super bosses, but Ganondorf's magic is very easily reflected by a lot of different things. In A Link to the Past, you can literally use a butterfly net to reflect his magic back at him. Granted, you're probably not going to be winning the fight, or well, you're winning the fight, but you're not necessarily going to be completely able to debilitate Ganon, simply because you need like holy weapons like the Master Sword to put him down, generally speaking. But it is totally possible to just continuously reflect his attacks back at him in order to eventually incapacitate him long enough to escape the battle, which is ultimately what I'm going with here. Sonic the Hedgehog. Again, one of the most powerful characters we're talking about. So how do you easily defeat a character who can go Super Saiyan, and that's like the most basic of their abilities? Well, he can't swim. Yes, I'm serious. Sonic has a huge weakness surrounding water. If you fight him on an island and make sure that none of his friends know about it, and just remove any ways of getting off there, you could effectively trap Sonic on the island until such a time as he's able to get off of it, with the assistance of other people, at which point I'm counting it as a win. Speaking of water, the Inklings, which, despite being squids, are canonically weak to water. Get an entire salvo of water balloons and continue to pelt it just like Joker until eventually the squids are no more. Dark Samus is an incredibly powerful phase-on entity, and is typically invulnerable to any types of damage. So why do they have an identifiable weakness? Well, they're weak to Phazon, and in their Metroid Prime boss fight, the way you defeat them is by redirecting their own attacks back into them. You see why they're here with Ganon. That means that the best strategy for taking out Dark Samus is to wear an entire suit with disco mirrors on you until eventually they fire their own attacks back at them so much they continue to stop existing. Finally, we have the Spaceys and Mega Man. Mega Man is super weak to spikes. Literally just stubbing his toe on a single spike is enough to instantly destroy him. Get a thumbtack, throw it on the ground, and watch as Mega Man crumbles. Finally, when it comes to the Spaceys, all of them have metal limbs. If you fight them in a factory with a giant electromagnet, you can effectively trap them in place and take them out by dropping them into a cauldron of boiling metal. I'm not proud of this one. I'm a little proud of this one. But it transitions nicely into our final category, what the fuck? Because defeating all of these guys, there is a salient solution, but you're probably gonna be saying, what the fuck? Starting with all of the Fire Emblem characters, and also Hero from Dragon Quest. They are all really, really powerful characters. They're essentially trained soldiers who have giant, legendary, and magical swords that can kill dragons. Now granted, you could potentially call upon the help of any of the allies or friends or Pokemon that you've collected over the course of this long journey, as well as using any of the power-ups. But I think there's a much more straightforward solution, and that is that all of these guys come from far in the past, and humanity has developed in such a way that bacteria and viruses have all evolved alongside us. Present them a peace offering covered in pick a disease here, and you've effectively recreated the first Thanksgiving. Oh boy, I'm gonna be paying for that joke later. The Lynx might not seem like a good fit for this category, but that's because there is a very unethical and effective way to beat them. Remember how I said too that these guys were gonna need to be defeated if we wanted to take down Zelda? Yeah, that's because if you stroll up to the battle, you're probably not winning. But what if you strolled up to the battle wearing armor? In the Legend of Zelda series, there are enemies, well, really more like special NPCs than enemies, called Kukos. They're basically chickens, and if Link damages the Kuko enough, they will eventually start to swarm in out of nowhere and relentlessly peck him to death. Raid a chicken coop, cover yourself in chickens, living chickens, and the Lynx will be too terrified to risk damaging you for fear of their own death. Speaking of birds, King Dedede, much like Kirby and Meta Knight, is incredibly powerful and on paper should be nearly impossible to defeat. And yeah, that sentiment kind of holds true, but the important thing to remember is he's like 2 feet tall. Literally just pick him up and walk directly to the nearest cement mixer and allow him to take a nice refreshing swim. Finally, we have Diddy Kong and Pac-Man. Much like King K. Rool, Diddy Kong presented a challenge, mainly because I wasn't 100% sure of how you were supposed to take out a monkey. And then I realized, oh yeah, I can just exploit the trauma of having Donkey Kong's charred corpse in front of Diddy and force him to surrender via exploiting a very deep and personal mental thing. I'm not proud of this one either, okay? And finally, we have Pac-Man, another character who at first was giving me some pause, and then I had a realization. The Power Pellet gives Pac-Man the ability to eat ghosts, but it also powers him up considerably. If you're able to find a Power Pellet before Pac-Man, you can turn the guy whose entire gimmick is eating other people into your next pizza dinner. Throughout the whole thing of this, you might have noticed that I left out Lucina from this Fire Emblem collection, and the main reason for that is that Lucina is one of my favorite characters from those games. Actually, she might be just my favorite Fire Emblem character in general, and I felt kind of bad doing this to her, so I've instead decided to erroneously move her into the flirt with them and hope it works out category, because she canonically will marry the first guy who has 4 conversations with her. And honestly, if I could end the game by doing that, I'm calling that the ultimate win. So there you have it. That is a comprehensive, not so comprehensive, list of how to defeat every single Smash Brothers character. And if you're thinking that some of these methods are a bit unorthodox or lacking in honor, then that is dishonest, calumnious, slanderous, libel. That is 100% completely objectively true. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed.